And welcome back to Law&Crime Daily, everybody. So we are continuing our coverage of the Idaho College student murders, where 4 students were murdered in a home not far from the University of Idaho campus. And Jeanette Levy and I hosted a live Q&A during the lunchtime hour on Law and Crime Network Wednesday, addressing some of the biggest questions that you have out there. And one of the critical ones was, why is it taking so long for police to release information? That is something that has frustrated the parents of one of the victims, Kaylee Gonsalves. Her father has hired a private investigator to look into Kaylee's brutal murder, as well as suspects that he claims the police wrote off too quickly. And he's also planning to hire an attorney to try to force the Moscow Police Department to turn over documents and evidence related to the case. On Tuesday, the Moscow Police Department released a new report on the information coming in from the public. So there have been more than, get this, 2,500 email tips, 2,700 phone tips, and another 1,000 digital media submissions. That is a lot to sift through. But Kaylee's parents have done interviews with media outlets saying that they need more information and that they deserve more answers. Veteran FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon took part in Wednesday's Q&A, and I asked him if hiring professionals like lawyers and investigators will help or cause more problems.
The lawyer will help them navigate the processes that are available to them as families of victims. There are a lot of victim witness statutes in certain states that help the families and witnesses and victims kind of navigate the process of how we get compensation or how we get information. And so those things can be kind of, onerous sometimes. And so an attorney who specializes hopefully in that area can help them navigate the paperwork that they fill out and the processes of what they can get and how they go about getting it. Hiring a private detective, I'm not a big fan of. They sometimes start parallel investigations. They talk to other witnesses that you've already talked to, and that can kind of complicate and interfere with the investigation. I was never a fan of that. When I was working on the inside as an investigator, me and the prosecutors would be working towards things, and when someone else is out there talking to witnesses that we've already talked to, or that was problematic to me.
Brian, it's interesting because when we discussed this, you said that having an outside investigator in a case like this is kind of like a dual-edged sword. Why do you say that?
It's a dual-edged sword in the sense that as much as you're helping the case, you could be hurting yourself as well, depending on how you wield that sword. Now, Bobby's correct. It's kind of the concept of too many chefs in the kitchen, everything gets burned. If you have an investigator running a parallel or intercepting investigation, they can kind of stumble on each other. But depending on how this investigator goes about, they could actually reach out to witnesses that the law enforcement never knew about. I know in New York, especially in other states, depending on the relationship between the police and the community, sometimes people will speak to the investigator or the family because they're sympathetic to the family needs more so or quicker than they would to the police. But if they work in conjunction or together, it could actually be helpful.
Yeah, and we know that Mr. Gonsalves hasn't identified who the private investigator is, but that it seems to be someone who's former law enforcement. Terry, I get the frustration. I completely do. But does frustration equal legal liability? Because part of the things that I wonder is, do you think that any of the parents are going to end up suing the authorities for the way they're handling this case?
Well, I hope that doesn't happen, and it might be just a little bit early to think about that, but they could actually say that they mishandled the case. Initially they said that the individuals were targets, then they said the building was targets. They also have been, as the father said, they have been dismissing people very quickly as suspects, and perhaps they should have been following that up. So I do think that they could have some claims here. Maybe they mishandled some of the evidence that's in that house by allowing some of the personal belongings to be taken out. So you could claim emotional distress, you could claim negligence, you could even try to make a claim for a constitutional right. But let's just hope the police are able to get all the answers.
And it's premature, right? It's premature to think this at this point, but it's something to consider nonetheless. Parents in Idaho are pleading for answers as time stretches on, and any substantial information from police has not been very forthcoming. So here's what we do know so far about the case. We know that 6 people were inside the home on November 13th when 4 of them were killed. Kaylee Gonsalves and her best friend Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin all died of stab wounds. The 2 others on the ground floor of the home may have slept through the entire thing. The police department and prosecutor's office have released conflicting information multiple times, and they've had to backtrack or clarify statements. So where does the investigation currently stand?
we're at that point in the investigation where we're still gathering information, we're still gathering tips, we're still gathering evidence, we're still doing everything we need to do. But there also comes a point in time when the family needs to have those belongings back, the ones that we can get them back. They've asked for some of those things back, so we're ready to take care of that for them.
And as you just heard, on Wednesday, officers did move boxes of personal items from the crime scene, loading them onto a truck. Law&Crime's Jeanette Levy is in Moscow, Idaho, digging into the police response, as well as the possibility of evidence being compromised.
Moscow police are planning to return to the home here on King Road to retrieve some of the personal belongings of the victims of these homicides. The police chief says that he wants to be able to return these items to the victims' families. Police hauled boxes of belongings out of the home. Chief James Fry explained why he and his command staff removed these personal belongings.
We're going to be getting those items back to the families. It's time for us to get those things back that really mean something to those families and hopefully to help with some of their healing.
The house at 1122 King Road remains an active crime scene, secured 24 hours a day. It's been processed for evidence, but it raises the question, could going back into the home compromise any evidence remaining? Retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon weighs in.
Everybody that comes across that yellow tape is logged in, when they were there, what they were doing there, where they went within the scene itself. And if they can maintain that kind of control, sure, I think that they can do this properly without damaging the credibility or the integrity of the crime scene.
King Road was the home to Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Xana Kernodle. Xana's boyfriend Ethan Chapin was staying there for the night. More than 3 weeks later, there's still no arrest and no known suspects. Moscow police describe this investigation as very active. They say they're still getting test results back from the crime lab and continuing to sift through thousands of tips. Reporting from Moscow, Idaho, I'm Jeanette Levy for Law&Crime Daily.
All right, my co-host Brian Buckmeyer joins me now. Brian, you're a public defender. You know what these families go through. It's just unimaginable, right? It's so tough.
Yeah, it's the combination of not knowing but needing to grieve and allowing a family to grieve while leaving no stone uncovered in an investigation with no suspect is difficult. On one hand, turning over personal items that the family wants and should have is important. Photos, clothing, or personal items that the victim's family may want so they can reflect on and remember those victims are things that are likely to be turned over, but the difficulty is knowing whether or not these items have any value to the investigation. Each of these items that are going to be turned over need to be photographed, tested if possible, and cataloged before so, because you never know what fact down the road is going to make something that they maybe turned over or didn't look at that much more important to the case. The hope is that the police are dotting their I's and crossing their T's so that no lead is lost as the family is given space to grieve.
Yeah, and let me bring in co-host and former trial attorney Terry Austin into the conversation. So Terry, we know that most cases, they're worked from the inside out. So that may be why the authorities are focusing so much on the crime scene, but what else do you think authorities should be investigating?
You know, they definitely have to follow each and every lead, not just for the suspect, but they also need to look at each of those victims and follow those leads out. So we know, for instance, that Ethan was a member of a fraternity. Were there any people there who had a problem with him? Make sure they follow that up. And as far as the other victims are concerned, did they have any other affiliations? Did they have any arguments? What was their relationship with their family? So they have to go as far as they can with each of those suspects from the inside out. And once they get out, follow those leads as much as they're following the leads inside that house. Inside the house clearly has DNA evidence, clearly has evidence as far as, a timeline is concerned, but they have to do the outside investigation too. And remember, we have a timeline for where they were the night of this incident. So we need to look at what happened when they went to that bar. What happened when they went to that party? Was there a problem there?
Right. And just because we don't know what they're looking into doesn't mean that they're not going through all of this behind the scenes.